She was supposed to die out there. That was the plan. Leave the disgraced Omega in the frozen waste beyond the northern ridge with no shelter, no supplies, no pack bond to call on. The cold would do what the court didn't want to do publicly. Clean, deniable, final. Except, on the third day, she didn't die. She crested the ridge, and she wasn't alone. Wrapped against her chest, bundled inside her own cloak, pressed against the last warmth her body had left to give, was the Alpha King's missing heir, the royal cub, gone for 6 days, presumed dead by every search party the king had sent into the frozen north. Alive, because of her. The vanguard saw her first. 10,000 wolves, soldiers, scouts, the full military force of the Ironmark pack, spread across the snow-covered valley in formation. Every single one of them turned. Oh, she kept walking. She didn't stop, didn't falter, didn't ask for anything, just walked forward through the snow with a royal child against her chest and frostbite in her hands and blood in her boots. And then, one soldier lowered his head, then another, then 10, then 100, then 10,000 wolves, the most feared military force in 7 territories, went to their knees in the snow for an Omega girl with nothing. For her, let me tell you what Sable was before I tell you what she became. She was 22 years old, an Omega with no pack bond, which in the world of the Ironmark territories meant she existed at the bottom of every hierarchy simultaneously. Not slave, not prisoner, simply unclaimed, unprotected. The kind of person who fills necessary roles and receives no credit for filling them. She who can be removed from any situation without consequence, because no alpha bloodline has staked a claim. She had worked in the Ironmark royal household for 3 years. Lower kitchens first, then the laundry. Then, because she was methodical and precise, and genuinely good at things the senior staff preferred to delegate, the nursery supply stores, the linens, the medicines, the careful inventory of everything a royal household needed to keep its youngest members alive and comfortable. She knew the nursery wing better than anyone. She knew the storage rotations, the physician's supply schedule, the specific weaknesses in the guard rotation on the East Corridor that she had noted and reported twice and been ignored about both times. That last part mattered. Later. The betrayal came from Lady Vorn, the senior court Omega, who managed the household hierarchy, with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent 20 years securing a position and intended to keep it. Sable had made the mistake of being competent in ways that were visible, had made the further mistake of correcting a supply error that, if left uncorrected, would have been traced to Vorn's department, had made the final mistake of doing this in front of 2 witnesses. Vorn moved quickly. The accusation was theft, a charge calibrated precisely for an unbonded Omega with no alpha to speak for her. 3 silver measures from the household stores, allegedly found in Sable's quarters during a search that Sable had not been present for and had not been warned about. The silver had been placed there. Sable knew it. The 2 witnesses knew it. Vorn knew all of them knew it. None of that changed the outcome. The Ironmark Pack's law on theft by unbonded Omegas was old enough to predate any pretense of nuance. Exile, immediate. Beyond the northern ridge, into the waste territory where the cold came down from the mountains and didn't stop. No trial, no appeal, no pack bond to intercede. They took her at dawn. 2 guards who didn't meet her eyes. A cloak that was adequate for Ironmark's winter, but not for the northern waste. No food, no blade, no fire kit. The head guard said the words, "By pack law, you are cast out. The territory rejects you. The pack does not know your name. Standard exile formula. Ancient. Absolute." Sable looked at him. She did not beg. She had understood since approximately the 2nd day of the accusation that begging would change nothing and cost her the only thing she had left, which was her own self-respect. She turned north and walked. The northern waste was not one thing. It was a succession of terrible things. The first day was wind, the particular wind that came off the Ironmark peaks, carrying ice crystals that felt like needles against exposed skin, that found every gap in clothing with the patient thoroughness of something that had been doing this for 1,000 years and had no reason to hurry. She walked. She found a rock formation by nightfall that broke the wind on 3 sides and was better than nothing. She slept in it because the alternative was not sleeping, and not sleeping was dying faster. The second day was snow. Heavy, of the kind that accumulated while you moved and added weight and reduced visibility to a gray-white blur in every direction. She oriented by the mountain peaks when she could see them, and by memory when she couldn't. She had no destination. Exile wasn't about going somewhere. It was about going away. She ate snow carefully, because eating snow drops your core temperature, and she had no warmth to spare, but thirst was also dying, and she had no choice. By the end of the second day, she was calculating with the precise, practical part of her mind that had never learned to stop working, that she had perhaps 1 more day. Maybe 2 if the wind dropped. Maybe less. She found shelter in what appeared to be a collapsed outbuilding, ancient, the wood black with age, but 3 walls still standing and a partial roof that blocked the snow. Where she crawled into the corner that was most protected and pressed herself as small as she could and thought, this is probably where it ends. Not with drama, not with ceremony. In a corner of a collapsed building in the frozen north, alone, because a senior court official needed a convenient problem to disappear, and Sable had been the most convenient available. She didn't cry. She had cried on the first night, briefly, privately, and then stopped because crying dehydrated you, and she was already dehydrated. She closed her eyes and heard something. It was small. That was the first thing. The sound was small, barely audible over the wind, a thin thread of noise that her brain almost filed as nothing. Irrelevant sleep before some older, more stubborn part of her pulled her back. She sat up, listened. There, the northwest corner of the collapsed structure, behind a fall of old timber. She moved toward it on hands and knees, fingers already so cold, she felt them more as blunt pressure than sensation. Pushed aside the timber. A child, perhaps 3 years old. Curled in the gap between the fallen wood and the old stone wall, wrapped in what had once been a very fine wool blanket, now wet, crusted with ice at the edges, completely inadequate for the cold. Dark hair. Gray eyes half open, unfocused, the specific vacancy of a child whose body was managing severe hypothermia by withdrawing to its center. Alive. Barely. Sable's first thought was purely practical. Another person generates heat. Sharing warmth with another person increases both your survival chances. Pick the child up. She picked the child up. She pulled him against her chest, inside her cloak, and sat back against the most sheltered wall and wrapped every layer she had around both of them and did not think about anything except stay warm, stay awake, keep breathing. The child stirred after a while, made a sound. Shh, she said. I've got you. Small breaths. He settled. His body began slowly to stop shaking quite so violently. She looked at the blanket she'd pushed aside. Fine wool. The kind the lower kitchens never saw, the kind used in the upper household. Deep gray with a border she recognized because she had inventoried it. She had inventoried it 3 weeks ago. Silver thread, iron wolf pattern. The nursery's warmest blanket, reserved for the royal chambers, only used for 1 occupant. The breath she took was very slow. She looked at the child's face. Dark hair, gray eyes, clearing slightly now with the warmth. A particular arrangement of features she had seen in the portraits that lined the east corridor of the Ironmark stronghold. The royal heir, Cale Ironmark, 3 years old. Missing for 6 days, She had heard this before her exile. The entire stronghold in a controlled panic, search parties sent in every direction, the Alpha King's military deployed to all 7 territory borders, everyone looking south and east where the roads went, where an abducted child would logically be taken. No one had thought to look north, into the waste where nothing survived. She sat for a long time in the cold dark with the Alpha King's sun pressed against her chest and the ice forming on the inside of what was left of the shelter's roof. She could wait for morning, hope someone found them. Like she could stay here, and both of them would be dead by dawn. Or, all right, she said quietly, to herself, to the child, to the frozen dark around them. We're walking. 3 years old is 26 pounds. She learned this with great specificity over the course of the hours that followed. She carried him against her front, his face tucked against her neck, her cloak wrapped around both of them, her arms locked beneath him. She could not put him down. He was too cold, too small, too close to the edge of something she couldn't let him go over. So she walked with 26 pounds against her chest, and the northern wind in her face, and the southern ridge somewhere ahead of her in the dark. She set herself rules. 11 steps before she could think about stopping. Then 12. Then 15. Or counting was something to do with the part of her brain that wanted to calculate how bad this was, redirect it into something useful. The child slept. She was glad. A sleeping child was a child not spending energy on fear. She talked to him anyway, quietly, a continuous low murmur about nothing in particular. The storage rooms she had managed, the specific qualities of the different medicinal herbs on the top shelf, the way the kitchen's bread smelled in the morning. She talked because talking required breathing, and breathing required keeping the lungs working, and keeping the lungs working was surviving. Her hands stopped hurting somewhere around the 2nd hour. That was not a good sign, and she knew it. Nerve damage, frostbite taking hold, the body rationing sensation as an act of conservation. She shifted her grip, confirmed she still had the child securely, kept walking. Her feet were worse. The boots she'd been given were Ironmark Winter adequate and Northern Waste catastrophic. She felt the cold working up from the soles first, then the toes going, then the sensation becoming a generalized distant wrongness that she categorized and set aside because categorizing it as problem and setting it aside as deal with that later, walk now, was the only workable option. She fell once. The snow gave way on a slope she couldn't see clearly in the dark, and she went down hard, twisting to keep the child from taking the impact. Her shoulder hit the frozen ground. She lay for a moment, the child still clasped to her chest, awake now, looking at her with wide gray eyes. "It's all right," she said into his hair. "We're all right." She got up. She didn't know how. She had no reserves left that she was aware of. But she got up because the child was looking at her, and she had told him it was all right, and making that true was the only thing in the world that currently mattered. There was a moment, somewhere in what she thought was the 3rd hour, though time had become a strange and unreliable thing, where she understood she was going to die. Not as a possibility, as a fact. The cold was too deep now, working inward, and the ridge was still ahead somewhere, and she had nothing left to spend on getting there. She understood this clearly. The way you understand things when the panic is too exhausted to keep running, and what's left is just clarity. She kept walking anyway, because the child was alive, because the child was going to keep being alive for as long as she was, because if she stopped, he stopped, and that was simply not something she was going to be responsible for. She found the anger then, underneath the cold and the exhaustion and the calculated acceptance of her own end. Something older and hotter, something that had been there since the morning 2 guards didn't meet her eyes and said the words that took her name away. They put me here to die. Lady Vorn and her planted silver, and her convenient accusation, and the court that saw what happened and said nothing, and the system that took a woman with no one to speak for her and removed her like a problem solved. They put me here. And they put this child here too, in their own way. By failing to protect him, by missing him, by looking in every direction except the one where he actually was. She was furious. She used it, fed it into her legs, or into the arms that held the child, into the next step, and the next, and the next. The ridge appeared in the gray pre-dawn light, like something she had imagined so many times it had stopped feeling real. She kept walking until she was on it. And then she looked down. The valley below the ridge was full of soldiers. She had known, abstractly, that the Alpha King had deployed his military. She had not had a clear picture of what that meant until she was standing on a ridge in the early light, looking down at the full Ironmark vanguard spread across the valley floor. 10,000 wolves in formation, the search perimeter extended to the northern waste as a last, desperate measure, the gray dawn making their silver armor look like the surface of a frozen lake. She stood on the ridge. She did not call out. She did not have the voice for it. Speaking had become difficult in the last hour, the cold doing something to her throat that she noted and set aside. She simply stood there and waited for them to see her. Captain Brennan Holt saw her first. He was on the eastern edge of the vanguard's line, coordinating the morning position report, when the scout beside him went completely still. He followed the scout's eyeline. A figure on the ridge, small, female, standing at the edge of the overlook in the thin early light, and something bundled at her chest, wrapped inside a cloak that was barely a cloak anymore, more ice than wool at this point. He raised his field glass. He looked for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, to the scout beside him, "Sound the halt." The scout stared at him. "Sound the halt," he said again. "And send someone to get the king. Now, run." He was already moving toward the ridge. She started walking down when she saw them moving. Toward her, not away. She took this as a positive sign. Her legs had developed a quality she could only describe as theoretical. She was aware they were moving, was directing them to move, but the sensation of doing so had become abstract, a message sent and received at a delay. She focused on her arms. The child was still there, still warm, still breathing. She could feel it, the small rise and fall against her chest, the most important information in the world. "Almost," she said to him. Her voice came out strange, cracked, barely sound. "Almost there." The first soldier reached her 20 yards from the valley floor. He was a big man, alpha, heavy-shouldered, in full military plate with the iron wolf mark on his pauldron. He stopped 2 feet from her. She could see him looking at what was bundled against her chest. She could see the moment he understood what he was seeing. His face did something complicated. He looked at her, at the frostbitten hands, the ruined boots, the cloak that had given everything it had and more, the body that was operating on something past what bodies were supposed to operate on. He lowered his head. Not a military bow. Something older. The instinctive acknowledgement that pack animals make toward something that has done something they recognize as profound. She walked past him. The next soldiers parted. She was not watching them. She was watching the ground, placing each step with the focused care of someone who understood that falling now, in sight of the finish, was not acceptable. But she heard it. The sound of the halt spreading, the cessation of movement, of equipment noise, of the low rumble of 10,000 bodies in formation. A silence falling over the valley like snow. And then, from somewhere to her left, the sound of a single soldier dropping to one knee in the snow. Then another. Then 10. She kept walking. "Sable." The voice stopped her, not because it was loud. It wasn't. Not because it was commanding. It was. But she had been commanded, and threatened, and accused, and exiled, and none of those had stopped her. It stopped her because it said her name. Her name. The one the exile formula had taken. The pack does not know your name. Someone knew it. She turned. Alpha King Davon Ironmark was 20 feet away. He had come at a run. She could see it in his breathing, in the way the snow was disturbed behind him where a king did not typically run, and had stopped. As if stopping was the thing he needed to do. Standing still was the thing, not closing the distance but staying exactly here and letting her see him clearly. He was tall, dark-haired, while the gray eyes that his son had inherited were fixed on her with an expression she had no reference for. She had never been looked at by an Alpha King before, not truly looked at, not with the full weight of undivided attention. She had seen him in the corridors of the stronghold, twice, from a distance from the position of someone who existed at the far edges of his household. He had never seen her. She was quite certain he had never seen her. He was seeing her now. His gaze moved to the child at her chest, back to her face. The expression did something that cracked the controlled Alpha King exterior, just slightly, just for a moment, like light through a seam in armor. "Is he?" His voice stopped. "Alive," she said. "He's cold. He needs the physician immediately. He's been hypothermic. I've kept him as warm as I could, but he needs—" "Yes." Devon was moving toward her. "Yes. May I—" He stopped himself, a foot away, close enough that the pack warmth that Alphas carried was present, and she felt it involuntarily, the specific resonance of it hitting the cold in her body like fire hitting ice, something her Omega nature responding to whether she directed it to or not. He was asking. The Alpha King of Ironmark was standing a foot away from an exiled Omega carrying his son through enemy territory, and he was asking. She unwrapped the child from her chest. Her arms screamed when they moved. She hadn't realized how completely locked the position had been until she released it, the muscles that had held that weight for hours protesting with a unified voice. She held Kale out. Devon took him. His hands wrapped around his son with the careful, overwhelming tenderness of a man who had believed for 6 days that he was holding grief, and was now holding something else, something he didn't have words for yet. The child stirred. Gray eyes opened, found his father's face. "Papa," said Kale Ironmark, 3 years old, in the voice of a child who has been frightened for a long time and has arrived somewhere safe. Devon made a sound. He pressed his son against his chest and turned his face away, and there was a moment, one moment, where the Alpha King of 10,000 wolves was simply a father, and the thing he was feeling was too large for public. Sable looked at the valley around her, at the soldiers still on their knees in the snow, in every direction she could see. Then her legs, which had carried her through the impossible on anger and stubbornness and the refusal to be responsible for a child's death, finally made their position clear. She began to go down. She did not hit the ground. Devon turned back exactly in time. One arm still holding his son, he caught her with the other. She registered this distantly, the solid alpha warmth of it, the way the cold in her body reacted to the pack resonance, like a compass finding north. "I've got you," he said. She had heard those words recently, from her own mouth, to a child on a frozen floor. She had not expected to be on the receiving end of them. "Physician," Devon said, not loud, but it moved through the assembled military like a stone through water. "Now, and someone get me a fire. Here, not at the camp, here." "I'm fine," Sable said. She was not fine, or she was aware she was not fine. But the habit of 11 years of existing at the bottom of every hierarchy, of making yourself small, of insisting you need nothing so no one can use your needs against you. It was a hard habit to break in the middle of an army. "No," Devon said. "You're not." He said it simply. No argument in it. Just, "You're not," and we're past the point where that claim is useful. He was still holding her up, his son in one arm, her in the other. Around them, the soldiers of the Ironmark vanguard, the most feared military force in 7 territories, were doing exactly what soldiers do when a commander is occupied, covering the perimeter, building the fire, clearing space for the physician, performing the work of protection without being individually directed. All of them with their heads still slightly lowered. In all of them, moving with the particular care of people who understood they were in the presence of something that required it. She woke in a tent. Warm. The specific, extraordinary warmth of someone who has been cold past the point of sensation and been brought back from it. Every nerve in her body announcing its presence simultaneously. Cale was on a cot across the tent, asleep, with a pack physician's hand on his forehead, and color in his cheeks that had not been there on the ridge. Sable lay still for a moment and took inventory. Hands, bandaged, frostbite treated, sensation returning in the specific unpleasant way that meant the damage wasn't permanent. Feet, similar. Shoulder, bruised where she'd fallen. Everything else, operating, more or less, in the way that things operate when they've been significantly exceeded and are now recalibrating. She sat up. Devon was in the tent. He was sitting in the only chair, in the part of the tent that was furthest from her cot. Giving distance, she understood. Choosing it deliberately. He had a cup of something warm in his hands that he wasn't drinking, and he was watching the physician attend to his son with the expression of a man who has been operating on crisis energy for 6 days and is only now beginning to understand that the crisis is over. He looked at her when she sat up. "Don't," he said. She had been about to swing her legs off the cot. "The physician says 4 hours minimum," he said. "The frostbite needs—" "I've been in the physician's way long enough," she said. "Old reflex. Take up less space. Need less. Apologize for existing in the room. Sable." Her name again. Said with a weight she didn't know how to process. "Lie down," he said. Not a command. Not quite. The particular tone of someone making a request they intend to be taken seriously. "Please." She lay down. He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me what happened," he said. "All of it. From the beginning." She told him. Not the exile part. Not yet. The cub first. The way she'd found him in the collapsed shelter. The condition he was in. The decision to walk south. The hours that followed. She told it the way she'd told Cale about the kitchen herbs. Matter of fact, without drama, one thing, and then the next thing, and then the thing after that. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the silence lasted a long time. "You knew who he was," Devon said. "When you found him." "Yes. You could have stayed where you were. Sent him on alone once he was strong enough to move. He was 3 years old and hypothermic," she said. "He wasn't going anywhere alone. You could have—" "No," she said. "I couldn't have." He looked at her. "Why?" She thought about it honestly. "Because leaving him would have been wrong," she said. "And I've had enough of being part of things that are wrong." Something moved across his face. He set down the cup. "The exile," he said. "Tell me." She did. Flat. Factual. Lady Vorn. The silver. The planted evidence. The 2 guards who didn't meet her eyes. The formula that took her name. He listened to all of it. When she finished, the silence was different from the first one. Heavier. She could see the alpha response in him. The controlled. A deliberate suppression of something that wanted to be considerably less controlled. The jaw held exactly so. The hands on the chair's arms, very still. "You knew," he said. "Before the exile, about the East Corridor Guard rotation. I reported it twice, to the head of household security. It was noted and not acted on. That's how they took him." She said nothing. "The people who took my son used an access point that you identified and reported, and were ignored about," he said. "And then the person who found my son, and carried him home through the northern waste, was the woman the court removed in order to protect itself." He stood, walked to the tent's entrance, and stood with his back to her for a moment, not walking away, she understood. Putting the controlled thing somewhere while he decided what to do with it. When he turned back, the Alpha King exterior was present, but what was underneath it was visible too, in the way it had been on the ridge when his son said Papa. "I didn't know your name," he said. "3 years you worked in my household. I didn't know your name." "No," she said. "You wouldn't. I was very far down." "That isn't—" He stopped. "That isn't acceptable. As an explanation. For a king whose people—" Another stop. "I'm sorry," he said, and she could see what it cost him, not in the prideful sense of an alpha who found apologizing difficult, but in the genuine sense of someone who understood the weight of what they were accepting responsibility for. Not for the exile alone. For 3 years of being invisible in my own house. She looked at him for a long moment. "What do you do?" she said carefully. When someone apologizes for something that can't be undone." "I don't know," he said. "Tell me." "You decide," she said, "whether the apology is the beginning of something or the end of it." He held her gaze. "Which would you prefer?" She thought about the frozen walk, about 26 pounds and 11 steps and the anger she'd fed into her legs, about the ridge and the valley and 10,000 wolves going to their knees in the snow, about a man who had run across an army to reach her and asked, "May I before taking his own son?" "Beginning," she said. Lady Vaughan's removal from the court was quiet and complete. Devon was thorough. He was, Sable would learn, in always thorough, and the investigation that followed uncovered not only the planted silver, but the broader network of petty corruption that Vaughan had been running in the household for years. The 2 guards were reassigned. The head of household security was replaced. The East Corridor guard rotation was fixed. Sable was offered a formal position, not in the lower kitchens, not in the laundry, not in the storage rooms. Head of nursery security, a newly created role with staff and standing, and the kind of formal protections that made her Omega status a characteristic rather than a vulnerability. She accepted it. On her own terms, which she stated clearly and which Devon agreed to without negotiation, because they were reasonable and he knew it. Cale recovered completely. Children are, in this way, yet more durable than they appear. He was back to full energy within a week, chasing the kitchen cats through the lower corridors and conducting an ongoing scientific inquiry into the exact depth of every puddle in the inner courtyard. He remembered the cold shelter. He remembered the walk. He remembered, and this was the part that stayed, that he told people with the serious clarity of someone reporting important information. The voice that talked to him all night about herbs and bread and the specific qualities of things, so that he wouldn't be afraid. "She talked so I wouldn't be scared," he explained to his father once, very seriously. "She knew that." "Yes," Devon said. "She did." "How?" Devon thought about it. "Because she's the kind of person," he said, "who pays attention to what other people need. Even when she's using everything she has." Cale considered this. "I like her." "I know," Devon said. "So do I." The change in Davon was not sudden. It was the slow, serious process of a man who had discovered, at significant cost to his own comfort, that governing well and knowing your people were not the same thing. That a stronghold could run with technical efficiency, while the people inside it disappeared into the machinery of hierarchy, unseen and unprotected. He walked the lower corridors now, not on inspection, on presence. The same way he had learned to sit beside his son's cot in the evenings, present without agenda, available without performance. He talked to people. He talked to Sable. Those conversations, which began in the tent on the ridge and continued in the nursery corridor and the stronghold's east garden and a dozen other ordinary places, were the kind that build something real. Not quickly, not dramatically. The patient accumulation of 2 people learning each other past the versions of themselves that the world had required. She told him what she saw, clearly and without softening it. He listened in the way that alphas had to choose to listen, against the instinct to assess and respond, choosing instead to simply receive. She learned that his control was not coldness. It was the specific discipline of a man who had been responsible for 10,000 lives since he was 25 years old. and had learned to carry that weight without letting it crush everything else. She taught him to set it down sometimes, just for an hour. The way you could set something heavy down without abandoning it. He never again did not know someone's name who worked in his household. There was an evening in late winter, the cold still present but changed in quality, the specific cold of a season turning rather than a season holding. When they were in the east garden, the one with the winter roses that bloomed against all sense in the frost. Cale was asleep. The stronghold was quiet. "The soldiers," Sable said. "On the ridge. Why did they—" "Because they recognized something," Devon said. "Pack instinct. The bow isn't ceremony. It's involuntary. It happens when you're in the presence of something that the pack animal part of you registers as worthy of acknowledgement. I'm an unbonded Omega. You walked through the northern waste, carrying the royal air on nothing but will," he said. "The pack doesn't care about hierarchy in that moment. It cares about what it sees, and what it saw," he paused, "was someone who gave everything they had for someone they had no obligation to." She was quiet for a moment. "I was going to die out there anyway," she said. "I know, that's the point." He turned to look at her. "You were going to die, and you spent your dying on someone else. There isn't a wolf in my vanguard who doesn't recognize what that is." "What is it?" He held her gaze. "The thing that makes a person worth following," he said. "The thing that makes a person worth—" He stopped. He'd started again. "The thing I've been trying to find in every council chamber and treaty negotiation for 6 years, and it walked over a ridge in a ruined cloak carrying my son." The winter roses moved in the cold wind. "Devon?" she said. He looked at her, the full, unguarded version of it, none of the Alpha King management, just a man looking at a person he had not known 3 months ago, and could not now imagine not knowing. "I'm not going to be easy," she said. "I know. I will tell you when you're wrong. Good. And I'm not doing this because of the ridge, or the soldiers, or what happened in the north. I'm doing it because—" She stopped. "Because you ran across an army to reach me. And then you asked." He understood. "I'll always ask," he said. She reached out. Cold fingers, still slightly numb at the tips, probably permanent, finding his hand on the garden wall. He turned his hand over, held hers. The stronghold rose around them, warm lit against the winter dark. The iron wolf banner moved at the top of the keep. Somewhere inside, the royal air slept, safe and warm and recovered completely. And in the east garden, in the cold, an Alpha King and an Omega girl with frostbite in her hands and fire in her chest decided quietly to be something neither of them had expected. Not a rescue. Not a debt. A beginning. They sent her into the cold to disappear. She came back carrying the thing they'd lost. She was discarded. She was dismissed. She was told her name didn't matter. And 10,000 wolves went to their knees in the snow, because courage doesn't check your bloodline before it decides to recognize itself. And love, real love, doesn't either.